Chapter 54 of The Secret Zoo. Hello. As Noah and Megan rounded a long curve on Jenkins Street, their home came into view. Little more than 50 yards away, it sat on a slight hill. 2 police cars were parked in the street in front of their house. A few people were out on their lawns and front porches, curious about the commotion at the Nowicki house. "What time is it, Noah?" Megan asked. He shrugged. 9 o'clock, maybe. Noah realized his entire adventure in the secret zoo had spanned less than 9 hours. That amount seemed impossibly short, but then Noah realized how quickly everything had happened. Crossing Arctic Town, exploring the City of Species, escaping the heights of the Forest of Flight, talking to Mr. Darby in Hummingbird Hideout, rescuing Megan from the Darklands. Every step of the way had taken less than an hour. Their neighbor, Mr. Peters, was raking dead leaves off his front lawn. As they passed his house, Mr. Peters absently lifted his head and said, "Noah," without pausing in his labors, and when he detected who was walking next to Noah, he started to say her name until surprise stopped him short. Megan just smiled and waved. The rake slipped from Mr. Peters' grasp and was swallowed by the pile of leaves. His body stiffened, his jaw dropped, and for a second he looked as witless as a zombie. When his senses came back, he turned and ran into his house, calling out his wife's name again and again, his voice echoing off the houses and causing a commotion. As the 2 scouts headed up the street, their neighbors took notice of them from the windows of their homes. They poured onto their front lawns, kicking through leaves and slippers and bare feet. Some were silent and others cheered. They clutched their hearts and covered their gaping mouths. Mrs. Sanders fell to her knees and began to pray. Megan was home, and it was a miracle. Noah and Megan smiled at their neighbors as they passed. To Noah, the moment was as surreal as anything he'd experienced in the secret zoo. Noah was bringing his missing sister home, and the streets were erupting with joy, relief, and love. As they neared the house, their mother and father peeked out their front door at the scene, spotted their children, and charged out of the house. The scouts ran to them, and they met on the sidewalk. Megan and her mother rushed into each other's arms, and Megan's mother burst into tears. She pressed her face against her daughter's and stroked her hair. Noah watched as Megan too began to cry. Softly at first, but then more easily until she was sobbing. Noah understood their emotions. He knew where they came from. They issued forth from a place too complicated and deep and beyond explanation to be called anything but the heart. As Noah's father dropped to his knees and partly wrapped himself in his son, tears poured from Noah's cheeks. Noah's sister was alive, and she was home. And now I will read the afterword. High up in Fort Scout. 2 weeks had passed since Megan's return. Carrying a plate of sandwiches, Noah walked across his backyard, climbed the ladder to Fort Scout, and joined his sister and friends high in the tree. He set the plate down, and each of them snatched a sandwich. Already life was getting back to normal. They ate in silence. Richie picked up the binoculars, walked to the window, and scanned the zoo. "See anyone we know?" Ella asked. "Nope, not yet," he said. "Wait a minute. Look at this guy." And he passed Noah the binoculars. Noah looked through the lenses and smiled. Blizzard lay on a block of ice in Arctic Town. He had stretched out his legs, crossed his paws, and rested his chin on top of them, as if they were a pillow. He was watching a group of curious children, not much younger than Megan. Noah passed the binoculars around. The scouts shared a laugh as they recalled their own visits to the zoo before their secret journey. They spent the rest of the afternoon hanging out in the fort, telling jokes, giggling, and talking. They discussed many things, but the topic repeatedly returned to the secret zoo and the future of the Action Scouts. Afternoon turned into evening, and Fort Scout received a visitor. This visitor didn't climb the ladder to enter from below. Tiny and blue-feathered, he swooped from the treetops and landed on Noah's shoulder. "Marlowe!" the scouts called out together. This was the first time they'd seen him since they left the City of Species. Marlowe tipped his head from side to side and blinked hastily. In his beak was a folded slip of paper. "Is that for us?" Noah asked. The kingfisher dropped the paper in his lap. Noah stared down at it, not knowing what to do. "Any chance you'll be opening that before Christmas?" Ella asked. "If not, I'm going to go home and get a warmer jacket." Noah unfolded the paper and glanced at the signature. "It's from Mr. Darby." "And?" "It's too dark. I can't see what's..." Ella snatched a pen light from Richie's pocket, a new one since he lost his other in the rhino-rama, and handed it to Noah. "Here, now you can read it." Noah switched on the light and shone it across the page. Marlowe sidestepped toward Noah's neck and looked down as if he were reading too. Noah's eyes grew so big that they almost popped out of his face. "What?" Megan questioned. "What does it say?" Noah said nothing. "Come on," Richie said. "What is it?" Noah cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Darby wants to know if..." He was interrupted by the sound of his mother calling them indoors. "Coming, Mom!" Megan shouted back. She climbed to her feet and dusted off her jeans. "Let's talk inside." Noah looked at Marlowe. "Can you come back tomorrow? Tell Mr. Darby I'll have an answer to his question by then." Marlowe chirped twice and shot back into the trees. "What question?" Ella asked. Noah gazed at his friends and his sister and said, "Guys, we have a lot to talk about." Before he could finish, Mrs. Nowicki called a second time. Noah said, "Mom's waiting. We'll talk inside." Ella and Megan jumped on the slide and coasted to the ground. Richie climbed down the ladder and Noah slid down the rope. Together, the four children dashed across the lawn to the back porch. Running made them giddy. They laughed and shouted and waved their arms in the air. Playfully, Ella bumped Richie into the hedge and Megan tripped Noah. They pushed their way inside and slammed the door on the night. Little did they know what a good thing that was. Because not only had they slammed the door on the night, but they'd also shut out something else. Someone was outside, hiding, watching, and waiting in the shadows. The inhabitants of the secret zoo knew this man as the Shadowist, but only a few believe he still existed. Mr. Darby and Tank were among those few. 100 years ago, the Shadowist had gone by another name. The name was DeGraff. 100 years ago, he'd stood on Mr. Jackson's rain-drenched porch. 100 years ago, he told a magical man about Banu. 100 years ago, Mr. DeGraff had been responsible for creating the secret zoo. And that's the end of our book. I hope you liked it. If you would like to read more about what happens with the Action Scouts, I highly recommend you check out the series. The next book is called The Secret Zoo, Secrets and Shadows. I hope you're having a great break, and I hope you're reading. See you later. Bye.